During the Ming and Qing dynasty, we're going to see a huge increase in agriculture output. And part of this was due to new crops introduced from the Americas, especially corn and sweet potatoes and peanuts. These become staple crops in parts of China. And these are crops that could grow in soils that really didn't grow other crops very well. And so they become a key crop for China. And as a result of this increase in agriculture production, we're going to see a significant increase in population growth over this period. Population is going to go from roughly 80 million at the beginning of this era to well over 300 million by the end of this era. We're also going to see a huge increase in manufacturing. And one of the key resources that China had was an availability of cheap labor. And with that, they were able to export large quantities of silk and porcelain. Those remain kind of China's key export items. Tea is also going to become a big export item of China. And they imported tons of silver, especially from the Europeans. And so a lot of that silver coming out of the Americas made its way to China because that was really the only thing that they wanted that the Europeans had to offer. And in fact, the economy did so well during the Qing dynasty. On 4 separate occasions, the Qianlong Emperor was able to completely cancel taxes. The government had so much money, they didn't need to collect taxes from the people. Foreign trade. So China is going to come to control a lot of the foreign trade. They were never cut off or isolated, but they wanted to control what was allowed in and out of their country. And so trade with the West, trade with Europe remained vigorous, but they grew increasingly leery of European ideas and European culture and technology. And so they started to reject a lot of European culture and technology. And as a result, China actually loses a lot of their technological innovation. And this is odd because up until this point in world history, China had always been a center of innovation. When you look at some of the most important inventions in all of world history, many of them came from China. You look at the previous era, we had things like gunpowder and movable type and the compass. Well, China loses a lot of that during this period. And so China was never completely cut off. They never isolated themselves. They just highly regulated who could trade and where they could trade and what they could trade. All right, when we look at the basic social system that existed in China, at the top was your emperor and his family. And so this included the emperor, his family, his wives, children, relatives. They lived in a forbidden city. They lived isolated lifestyles for the most part. Underneath that was your upper aristocracy. And this was made up of your landed aristocracy, your gentry, who inherited land and had a lot of the wealth and land tied up in their families. It also included those scholar bureaucrats, especially the ones that passed those upper levels of the exam. And some of these scholar bureaucrats make their way into that landowning aristocracy as well. Most of the population remained peasants. And even though they worked the land, their work was actually well respected. Under Confucianism, they valued the work that peasants did. Not that they had any wealth, but their work was respected. Then underneath that, you had a small class of skilled workers and artisans and things like that. Then at the bottom of society were your merchants, and at the very bottom, your mean people, your lowest classes. But as always in China, merchants, even though they were wealthy and even though they provided an important role in society, they were always looked down upon because of the way that they made their money. Confucianism looked down on the way that merchants made their money. Basically, they were making their money through the work of others, and so the way they made their money was not valued. So they had wealth, but as far as how they were viewed in society, they were often looked down upon. Then at the very bottom of society were your mean people, your lowest of classes. This included your slaves and servants, entertainers, and prostitutes as well. So when we look at cultural influences in China, Confucianism dominated. Again, the entire examination system revolved around Confucianism. Confucianism helped reinforce family values and the patriarchal system, and Confucian values were also reinforced in novels and books of the day as well. As far as the role of Christianity, Christianity was first introduced by the Portuguese, and the Jesuits, and this begins with Matteo Ricci, who was a Jesuit. They're able to make their way into the Ming court with their technology, specifically clocks. The Ming Emperor was fascinated by European clocks. And so they kind of get their foot in the door by bringing in European clocks and some other technologies. And they were the only ones who kind of knew about these technologies, and they were the only ones who could fix the clocks and stuff as clocks began to spread in China. And so that's how they kind of got their foot in the door and were allowed into China. And so the Jesuits did begin to spread some Christianity, but they really didn't win very many converts. So only about 200,000 or so people actually converted to Christianity. And it seems like a large number, except for at this time, China's population stood at between 200 and 300 million. So when you look at the overall percentage of people that actually converted to Christianity, it was only a very small number.